JT Shaver here with New Layer, and today I want to show you a trio of lenses so good they single-handedly convinced me not to sell my Canon M50. These are the 23, 33, and 56mm f1.4 lenses from Viltrox. They're wide aperture, fixed focal length, autofocus lenses for APS-C cameras from Canon, Sony, and Fuji. First I'll cover some of the basic things I like about these lenses, and then we'll get into the sample photos and video footage. These lenses are designed for APS-C sensor cameras, so they're the equivalent of 35, 50, and 85mm on a full-frame camera. Without getting too deep into crop factor, cameras with smaller sensors like the EOS M series from Canon will look more zoomed in compared to full-frame cameras when you're using the same lens from the same distance. For example, using the 33mm Viltrox lens on the Canon M50 would give you the same framing as if you were using a 50mm lens on the Canon R5, which is a full-frame camera. You also get less shallow depth of field, which is the reason you don't get blurry backgrounds when you take photos with something like your phone. The aperture on your phone lens might also be f1.4, so it lets in the same amount of light, but the sensor is really tiny, so you get a really deep depth of field. The build quality on these lenses is absolutely fantastic, and it destroys the build quality on the kit 15 to 45mm lens that came with my M50. They're super solid all around, the silver metal looks amazing, and they're honestly one of the best feeling lenses I've ever handled. As stupid as it sounds, the lens hoods might be my favorite part. They have a plastic mounting ring that, through some kind of magic, makes it really easy and satisfying to click them into place. It seats over the lens easily and just locks perfectly into place every single time. With the way these feel when you handle them, I could probably do an ASMR segment just on these lenses.
Do you like the way that sounds?
The focusing ring on these is all metal, so you don't have to worry about anything rubber wearing down over time. They also have a manual aperture ring, which is a nice touch. They have 9 aperture blades and go from f1.4 to f16. On the far end of the manual aperture ring is the letter A for automatic, and you set it to automatic when you want to control the aperture from your camera. The one downside to the manual aperture ring is that on a small camera like the M50, the fingers on your left hand kind of run into the fingers on your right hand when you're adjusting it, and you kind of have to re-grip and adjust from there. This really has less to do with the design of the lens and just the fact that APS-C cameras are pretty small, but it's something I noticed, so I wanted to mention it. These lenses also focus just as fast as anything I've ever used, and they're completely silent unless you stick your ear right up to the lens while you're using it. These lenses also work perfectly in both photo and video mode on my M50 with one exception. In 4K on my M50, the autofocus just doesn't seem to work at all, but it works fine in every other mode. To me, this makes absolutely no difference because in 4K on the M50, the autofocus sucks so bad, it doesn't matter what lens you're using. In 1080p, it's fantastic because it uses dual pixel autofocus, but once you switch to 4K, it uses contrast detect autofocus. The contrast detect autofocus on the M50 is really bad, and it just hasn't reliably worked for me ever. It's so bad, I don't even consider turning autofocus on in 4K on the M50 regardless of the lens I'm using. The other downside to the Viltrox lenses that I've noticed is that the chromatic aberration is slightly worse than the more expensive brands. It's really only noticeable on high contrast images and can typically be fixed pretty easily in post anyways. Personally, I think the cost savings you get with these lenses is totally worth that trade-off. Most people who buy APS-C cameras are buying them for personal or semi-professional use. So I think having the absolute best lenses regardless of the cost is not nearly as important with these cameras as it is for something full frame and higher end. Lastly, these lenses are not weather sealed if that matters to you. What I'm going to share next is extremely important before you buy any lens for video, but if you do want to skip ahead to the video footage, you can use the chapter links in the description. I talked about crop factor a little bit earlier, and on the Canon M50 it is 1.6 times. On top of that, different video modes on different cameras might have additional crop factors because instead of using the entire sensor, they might just use the center part, and so you get an additional crop. So on the Canon M50, there's no additional crop factor when shooting in 1080p, but in 4K you get an additional 1.6 times crop. 1.6 times 1.6 is 2.56, so in 4K on the Canon M50, you get a total of 2.56 times crop factor. That makes the 23mm lens a 59mm equivalent, the 33mm lens an 85mm equivalent, and the 56mm lens a 143mm equivalent. A lot of people absolutely hate this about the M50 and some other cameras, but it's not that big of a deal to me. It's just something you have to plan for. If you want to vlog on the M50 in 4K, that's just not going to be possible with any of these lenses because it just won't be wide enough. This is the 23mm lens on the Canon M50 in 1080p, And I have it at arm's length on a mini tripod, so if this isn't too zoomed in for you, then the 23mm version might be a good lens for vlogging. The plus side to a doubled crop factor is if you want to get some extra reach or get really zoomed in, you can do that without having to physically move closer to your subject. On top of that, you get all the low light benefits of an f1.4 aperture, and you get a deeper depth of field, so more things will be in focus. I've also heard that Viltrox is working on a 13mm lens, so if you want me to do a follow-up video, leave a comment and let me know, because that might be a perfect vlogging lens even in 4K on the M50. Overall, just make sure you know the photo and video mode crop factors on your camera before buying any lens. All that said, you finally made it to the sample video footage, so here's a B-roll sequence I put together using a Canon M50 handheld with these 3 Viltrox lenses. Overall, I think these are one of the best values in the EF-M mount, and the good news is if you shoot Sony or Fuji, they also come in an E and X mount, although only in black at the moment. The 33mm is around $259, and the 23 and 56mm are around $299. For the build and image quality you get out of these lenses, I think those are killer prices. A 50mm full frame equivalent at f1.4 is what many people would consider the best lens to get if you could only ever buy one in your entire life. Being able to get one this good and this cheap is pretty unbelievable, and the fact that you can buy the entire current trio for less than $850 brand new is pretty insane. So what do you think? Is this the ultimate set for APS-C cameras, or do you think it's worth spending extra and getting something else? I'll have links to all these lenses in the description if you want to check them out, and they are affiliate links, but it doesn't cost you anything extra if you pick them up, and it really helps me create more videos like this. I do gear reviews, lighting setups, and other videos every week, so make sure you're subscribed, and follow me on social media because I post a lot of stuff there that doesn't make it to YouTube. That's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.